Hi, Shalom, welcome. I apologize. I have a family of children in the house, so if it gets a bit noisy, I'll mute myself if the family sounds. So let me dive in. I wanted to talk about Gaza border, the Israel-Gaza border. You guys ready and interested to learn about some highlights among the Israel-Gaza border? Yes, awesome, awesome. So. Just a few words of background. I live in a moshav called Yoshivia, right next to between Netivot and Sderot. So I myself live in a moshav not far from the Gaza border. So all of the stories of rockets and Seva Adom, and that's also what me and my family have experienced the last almost 4 years since we've been living in the town of Netivot, and now in a moshav that's even closer, just 5 minutes drive south of Sderot. For 9 years, I was running until COVID-19 Abraham hostels in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, a dual narrative tour to Hebron. And a year ago, I launched a new tour with Abraham Hostels that I ran every single week up until March 11th, called the Gaza Border Reality Tour. So I'm going to be running through some of the really interesting places and highlights that I've learned about, and I think is worthwhile for any of your groups coming who want to learn about the geopolitical situation, especially what Israelis have to deal with living close to Gaza, about the situation Gaza and Israel, from all the different levels of history to the present day contemporary situation. And the places that I'm going to run through, I had planned an hour and I was 20 minutes just trying to overcome my technical difficulties. So maybe I'll try to do it in 50 minutes. Does that sound good? Will I have your attention with me for that time? Okay, so I'm gonna start by from north to south. Let's say you're driving with a group from Ashkelon and you're approaching Tzomet Yad Mordechai. Okay, I'm gonna skip Kibbutz Yad Mordechai. I know there's quite an interesting viewpoint and story to tell there, and I'm gonna be focusing just on what for me are the highlights along the Gaza-Israel border and what you guys might find interesting. I also do encourage you to interrupt me with questions. Okay, so first of all, I always like to point out that the highway that we're driving on from Ashdod, Ashkelon, all the way to Erez checkpoint is the same ancient road from the Assyrian Empire to ancient Egypt. The highway that, as you all know, it's the same north-south road. And that road, as soon as it crosses into Gaza, changes names and is called Salah ad-Din Road. Now, as soon as you pass Tzomet Yad Mordechai, on the left, you see a big stone marker on a hill. That was a marker from the Ottoman and British periods of the Gaza region. There's a little, like a stone obelisk on a hill on the left, just past Tzomet Yad Mordechai. And I'm going to focus first right now on a very interesting place that no tourists ever go to, but has always been quite an interesting experience. Now, I want to know, I have a few pictures and maps that I want to upload during this discussion. Can I have just a quick suggestion? Do I just
What? Okay, first, Eliyahu, first of all, Eliyahu, if you're going to be showing maps, we don't see any maps.
You don't see any maps?
Right, okay. We see your beautiful face, but if you want to show us something else, we're not seeing it.
No, I don't mean to show physically. I meant to upload onto the share screen. Like
yes, please. Yes, please do that.
Okay, so I will do that now. Here's a good one. So hold on. Do I drag a file to share screen to put a map there? Let's see.
Just double click.
I'll just double click. Okay. Okay, is anything appearing by you?
Not yet.
No, but can you stop moving your camera because it's making people dizzy?
Okay, I'm gonna stop moving the camera. I apologize. Okay. So while I try to get that map up, I'm gonna talk about the first place that I wanted to mention on my discussion here. The Erez border crossing. Up until 2005, there was a small little checkpoint for Gazans to come into Israel and for internationals and journalists and media to go into Gaza. It was called the Erez crossing, and it was the same crossing I know myself because I used to run a dialogue project bringing Israelis into Gaza and Gazans into Israel in the time of the Oslo Accords. It was just basically metal corrugated passageway. In 2005, after basically when Ariel Sharon disengaged, signed off on the disengagement from Gaza, and 21 Israeli communities and 9,000 Israelis, as you all know, were uprooted from their communities in Gaza. Israel and the world had hopes that finally peace would come with Gaza. So the world invested $60 million in a building, $60 million in a building, excuse me, $60 million in a building called the Erez border crossing. And you can actually take a group and drive right up to it. As you're driving up, there's a big sign in Arabic, Hebrew, and English that says, "Welcome to the Erez crossing." And I always like to start a presentation about what they're about to see because they can take all the pictures they want at the sign. But as soon as you turn around the corner and actually drive up to the Erez border crossing, the Israeli army forbids any actual photographs of the building. But what is interesting is that you're at the sign and you look up, and usually there's a big observational balloon above you that looks like a mini Zeppelin with cameras on it. And that's always interesting to point out. And then when you pull up to the Erez border crossing, it's totally open. Anyone can drive up to it. You see this huge building that looks like an airport terminal, and it's actually built by the airport authorities, the same people who built the new terminals at Ben Gurion. But what I always refer to it as a white elephant because it was built with the capacity to handle 50 to 70,000 people, Arabs, Palestinians, workers potentially coming into Israel every single day. And at the most, even at its height, there were maybe 3,000 every single month. That's including people coming in for medical care, Arab going to hospitals in Israel and the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, coming in for medical care, and also coming for work, okay? Okay. So the Erez crossing is very interesting, and there's a place, if any of you are ever interested, to actually talk to, and they're very approachable, Palestinians coming in for medical care or merchants. And the interesting thing, the story of the merchants is that only 10% of them are actually merchants. Both Netanyahu and Hamas, Likud and Hamas government have this fiction that both sides can't admit that we're allowing workers into Israel, so we call them merchants. So 10% of them, you'll see the guys standing around in suits. They're the ones that are actually doing trade and traveling both to import steel and school books and all sorts of things into Gaza, as well as merchants who are there and that's the one place they can leave to transport usually agricultural goods for sale in the Arab-Palestinian West Bank market in places like Hebron. So there's always an opportunity. Actually, they're very friendly, very welcoming. If you just say, I have a few tourists, a few strangers, there's usually someone who speaks English among the group. And for every single week during my tour, the first place that I start, since we're talking about Gaza, is actually going into meat. So I'm going to another location where there's less kids jumping on trampolines. Is to a place to meet actual people from Gaza. I apologize for the camera. And just pointing. Alrighty, Paul. So at the Erez crossing, and there's always a chance to meet someone. Now, from the Erez crossing, okay, as you're leaving, and now we're going back north, okay, away from the main crossing point between Israel and Gaza. Well, first of all, I want us to also add there are often aid workers there, European aid workers who are going in and out of Gaza, UN workers, international journalists, media people, and they're always bottlenecked going through one place. So if you're ever interested to actually meet any of these people every single day, it's a very interesting scene there at the Erez border crossing. Now, leaving the Erez crossing, as we drive slightly north to the left now, we're going back towards Tzomet Yad Mordechai. There's a moshav called Nativa Asara. You guys have all heard of Nativa Asara, right? Moshav Nativa Asara. You drive into Moshav Nativa Asara, and there's a sign that will take you to a woman's home. Her name is Sameret, an Israeli woman has transformed her home into a artist center and a place for presentations about what Israelis have to deal with and live with living close to the Gaza border. So, and you can even put it in ways. It's called Nativ Lishalom. It's very easy to get there, and you make an appointment, and she has in English and in German translations and many other languages, English and Hebrew, about a 20-minute video presentation of what is life close to the border like, and her vision and to do a project to take the ugly border wall right next to Nativa Asara. There's a border wall, and there's also a higher second wall that is built to protect the community from sniper fire. So the sniper fire wall, she has made this project in the last probably 8 years or so to take to make herself these colorful little painted tiles, and then invite the tourists with a little piece of what she calls the glue, but it's a little piece of, I call it the hummus. It looks like hummus. And I always throw in some Adam Sandler jokes and the hummus and stuff. And basically, you invite the tourists to go and put this up on the wall themselves. And it's always interesting who you can meet there. Oftentimes, groups of soldiers and it's just a matter of pictures, but I have all the material. So Nativa Asara also has an amazing viewpoint. I'm going to be talking about a few more viewpoints, but a viewpoint named after an Israeli colonel from the Moshav who was killed in one of the battles called the Press, Colonel Press, and it's a very interesting viewpoint. It's a very interesting viewpoint to see, especially into the agricultural areas of northern Gaza. Okay, so I'm going to take us now out of Moshav Nativa Asara. We're going to go back up to across from Somet Yad Mordechai. They're almost directly across. If you pull in, there's a sign for the ruins of an Arab village from the 1948 war. The village is called Der Sneid. Der Sneid. And at Der Sneid, there's remnants. Yes, are you with me?
Gotcha.
Yeah. At Der Sneid, there's ruins of a train station from the Ottoman era. There was a train network, as you all know, probably better than I do to explain it, but from Lebanon and Syria going to Egypt, and it went straight into Gaza. And this was a small Arab town, and there are actually some of the buildings from the old train station and a bridge that was built by the Ottomans and upgraded by the British in the ruins of a village called Der Sneid. I also use the chance when I get to Der Sneid to talk about the two different narratives of the 1948 war, which later I'll be talking about some of the historical sites in the Gaza border from the 1948 war from the Israeli point of view. Now, the Arab and Palestinian narrative in Gaza is that they deserved what they call the right of return. So I always like to talk about the debate about right of return at the ruins of this particular village and this train station called Der Sneid, which entrance, as I said, is directly opposite on the other side of the road, north of the Erez crossing, opposite the entrance to Nativa Asara. Okay, so Der Sneid, and there's very easy to find road that goes right up to this old bridge and buildings from an old Arab village and train station that existed during the Ottoman and British eras. Now, going north, back to the Somet Yad Mordechai. Now we're turning right and we're driving south on the highway towards Sderot. Okay, and as you're driving south on the highway towards Sderot, the first thing is on the right, opposite the entrance of a kibbutz called Or Haner, and the road that leads to a kibbutz called Kibbutz Erez. One day last March, we're going the tour, and the road was totally wide open. And then there were different rounds of rockets and clashes between Israel and the Arabs in Gaza. And we canceled our tour, obviously, on a day right after a ceasefire where there had been just 500 rockets fired at Israel from Gaza. But we come back a week later and there's a new wall there. And what's the story? There's a wall on the side of the road with a new mound of dirt that's piled up with next to the highway. And what had happened is that an Israeli named Moshe Feder in his 70s, a contractor had stopped his car, and a militant extremist terrorist from Hamas fired an anti-tank missile at his car. He was killed on the road there. So at the place where he was killed is actually a new wall that for the first time we in the area and Israelis realized that this little stretch of road is vulnerable not from missiles in the air and not from bullet fire, but from anti-tank missiles. So it's very interesting just to show in the landscape of what they've built along the road, the reality of what it is like just to drive along the highway and how you're at risk of being so close to the border. So there's this new wall on the side of the road, and you can't miss it. The word is berm, a berm of earth, a big pile of earth with trees planted along it, right at the entrance as you're driving. If you were to turn off that highway towards the entrance of Kibbutz Erez. Now, just past Kibbutz Erez, before you get to the town of Sderot and the kibbutz called Nir Am, there is a gas station, and you turn on off the gas station, and basically there's a viewpoint, a beautiful viewpoint. Yes, I do have a few pictures. I see, yes, it would be nice to have pictures of what we're talking about. I'll keep trying to see if I can upload a few of those here. But basically, as you're driving south, before you get to the town of Sderot and the entrance of Kibbutz near you turn on the right, and there is a road that drives up to an incredible viewpoint of the northern Gaza-Israel border. And it goes up onto a hill, and this hill is named after a what they call a Jewish cowboy. Basically, he was like a muhtar for the original kibbutz of Nir Am. Okay, and there's sort of like this little statue there. Of the original, it's sort of like a pestle of a man, of a cowboy, and you go up to this viewpoint, and there's a beautiful oak tree that was founded by the original kibbutznikim, and it's the best viewpoint. On the one hand, you're literally opposite, right above the train tracks going into Sderot. You're opposite the entrance of the city of Sderot on one side, and you're at one of the best viewpoints to look into, right at the northern Gaza-Israel border. You're looking at an army base called the Knee. It's called the Knee Army Base because the northern Gaza-Israel border curves down and looks like a knee from the north-south line. When it cuts south this way, there's an army base, and you're literally adjacent to that army base. You're looking at the northern Gaza-Israel border, and right across the border, you're looking directly and very close into Beit Haniya, which is the northernmost neighborhood in Gaza.
Eliyahu, excuse me.
Okay?
Hi.
Yes.
We're having problems.
Yes.
We're having problems that for some reason your share screen is not working. Could you give us like maybe coordinates or something more that we'd be able to figure out where to go to see this, to get to this viewpoint?
Yes. Yes. Do any of you have here? I can maybe do a drop point on Google Maps. Yeah, Amud Anan. Yes, Amud Anan. I'm going to Amud and follow his directions. Yeah, it's a great viewpoint. But I'll try to get. I'd rather not get back down trying to in the middle of my discussion here.
No. I don't want you to do that. Eliyahu, what I'd like you to do is just give a little bit of an explanation. Like if you're going down the road, you turn and you're with the entrance to Sderot
Yes.
on your left.
Okay.
Okay,
Sure.
something like that to give us.
Yes. Sure. Okay. You've gone down the road. Remember, I told you at the entrance of Kibbutz Erez to the right. Okay, everyone with me? You keep going south. Okay, and you keep going south, and there's a gas station, a petrol station, well before Sderot on the right. There's the only one. It's a big one, a petrol station. So you turn into that petrol station, and this is before Kibbutz Nir Am. And at the petrol station, and it's where there are a lot of off-terrain vehicles that's basically where the launching point for ATV, Jeep trips and stuff, the whole region. There's a big parking lot. And you pull through that parking lot and you see the hill right above you. You can just drive. There's a few dirt roads, and it's literally 5-minute drive from the gas station up to this beautiful viewpoint. And they call it actually the Camel Hill. because there are two humps. And actually, when you're in the town of Sderot, you see the tree and that viewpoint from the town of Sderot. That's a one point between Sderot and Gaza itself. It's like perfectly right in the middle. Sderot on one side and looking into northern Gaza on the other. Is that clear? Am I giving a good explanation how to find it?
Yes, that's fine,
Maybe
thank
what
you.
I'll do, maybe what I'll do, guys. I want to be fair, and I will prepare the next day after my presentation, maybe a mail or just with links to the coordinates. Oh, there you go. Okay, I think somebody succeeded to do that. Okay, but I want to keep on moving now. I'm now leaving the viewpoint, which is named after the cowboy, the Mukhtar cowboy from Kibbutz Nir Am. Now we're driving south. Okay. On our left is the entrance of the town of Sderot. Okay, Sderot, and on our right is the entrance. Okay. On the right, past the entrance of Kibbutz Nir Am, you get to a very basic tzomet, and the tzomet is called Tzomet Shar HaNegev. Okay. You take a right at that tzomet, and now you're driving towards Kibbutz Mefalsim. And to the right off of Kibbutz Mefalsim is a Black Arrow site. Everyone know Black Arrow? Anyone know? A bus can get to, someone asked, can a bus drive on that dirt road to the Camel Hump? A bus can, but you have to be very careful. I've seen army buses up there, mini buses. At the very least, someone asked about, can we drive up? I'm backing up of the Camel Hump. At the very least, you could park the bus before. There is a certain place where it's a little bit steep, and not all bus drivers will feel comfortable. It's not far of a walk, even if you wanted to park at the bottom of the hill and walk up to the Camel Hump. But in my opinion, that's much better than the Kobe, Mitzvah Kobe in Sderot. It's one of the best viewpoints of the whole area. Okay, the Camel Hump viewpoint. Now, Tomet. Now we're going. We passed Sderot. Now we're taking right. Okay, towards Kibbutz Mefalsim and Kibbutz Kfar Aza. Okay. Now the first thing that tourists, I never thought it was interesting, but without fail, every tour group I've ever taken, there are these little, next to every bus stop, there's little migunit, little rocket shelters. And the rocket shelters all have these paintings on them by a young man from a kibbutz who did this spray paint artwork. And there's a little migunit with a painting, a spray painting of a girl and flowers, and the flowers that everyone comes to the south for Festival de Ramadan. So I always think it's not worth, we can just drive past and point it out. I've always had church, no, let's stop here. I want to go into a rocket shelter. I want to experience. Trust me, they always find it, and they always want to stop, and they want to take a picture of this particular mikunit, which has the spray paint of a girl with the red flowers. You drive past that mikunit, you've now passed Kibbutz Mefalsim. Now, when you're pulling into, everyone here has heard of Black Arrow, right? Black Arrow, you've heard of Black Arrow? You can actually drop, the cement blocks are not blocking the road. Someone wrote about the camel viewpoint. The cement blocks used to be there, they're not blocking them now. They do put them in place on occasion. Okay, I was just there in March with a group, March 11th or 10th was the last group I led there. Sorry, someone posted a question about the Camel Hub. Now, the first thing that's very interesting to point out when you pull into when you pull into the Black Arrow, is the first building that you notice is called the Armistice Building. This is the building where Israel and Egypt signed the Armistice Agreement. So I always like to point out it's in this particular building that the border that we call Gaza-Israel border today was signed and negotiated, and all of the map that we have. And I always like to show people the 1949 Armistice Agreement and 1950 Armistice border, because it was implemented in 1950, was signed and designed right in this particular house, the Armistice House. So that's one thing that's really fascinating. Now you keep driving, and I'm going to get back to the Black Arrow in a second, but you keep driving past the Black Arrow, and there's two very, very, very interesting viewpoints and lookout points. The first I'm going to talk about is Asaf Siboni. Anyone here heard of Asaf Siboni lookout point? First of all, Asaf Siboni was an Israeli young kibbutznik who was one of the 72 Israeli soldiers who were killed when the helicopters crashed, right, in Lebanon, in the Lebanon War. And there's a memorial that his family built, which has wind chimes, to this kibbutznik, okay? This young kibbutz, a soldier from this kibbutz called Nir Am. And there's these wind chimes. And next to the wind chimes on the right, first of all, there is a magar, a huge magar mine, a water reservoir. So it's a good point to talk about the reservoir system. And I always like to point out the history that the pipes that went to build this reservoir in the 1940s was one of the reasons why when London was blitzed by the Nazis, they didn't have the pipes to get the water quickly to put out the fires, because all the pipes had been commissioned to bring to Palestine to build this water reservoir system. And this particular reservoir that the viewpoint into Gaza on one side, the reservoir is the northernmost point of the southern aqueduct system that starts at Kibbutz Nir Am and is what allowed settlement between 1937 Peel Commission and 1947 Partition Plan for the 11 Nikudot, the 11 Nikudot, and all of the Yeshuvim, basically, that when the Yeshuv noticed the maps of the Peel Commission, they didn't see a single possibility and any mention of a potential Jewish state south of Rehovot and Rishon LeZion. So it's a good place to point out that this particular water reservoir and the water system, this particular water system, this is a good starting point to have a good discussion about how water led to settlement and how the whole southern Israeli state, basically from south of Ashdod, Ashkelon, was founded based on the ability to distribute water from this particular point. So you go to the Asaf Siboni lookout, there's the wind chimes. Now what's really emotional story is, remember I told you when we were driving south at the entrance of Kibbutz Erez, the wall that went up after an Israeli named Moshe Feder was killed, there's an emotional, dramatic story that's very interesting to point out. The woman, Moshe Feder, when he was killed by that anti-tank rocket, he left behind a wife. But that wife was actually not her first husband. The story of her first husband was that her first husband was a helicopter pilot, best friends of Asaf Siboni, who was piloting the helicopter that crashed on the Lebanon border. So she loses her first husband, the best friend of the young kibbutz soldier from that you're at the memorial for, and her second husband is killed, half a kilometer away from the grave of her first husband's best friend. So there's a whole dramatic story that can be told about connecting the two, the Asaf Siboni memorial and the story of Asaf Siboni and his best friend, the helicopter pilot, whose wife was the first, whose best friend was the first husband of a woman who got remarried, and her second husband was killed at the other place that we just mentioned. So we're looking at the water reservoir. You look then at the town of Sderot. At that point, I always say on the right, there's Sderot, and I say, look at the distance between Sderot and northern Gaza, and it's perfect. You can see the closest firing range where rockets will be fired from Beit Hanun. So I usually do like a sweep, and I start to the right, and basically I'm looking at Sderot to my right, Kibbutz Nir Am. I'm sweeping. I said in the distance on a clear day, we can see Tel Aviv, we can see Rehovot, we can see Ashdod, we can see Ashkelon, and then I'm sweeping slightly to the left, and I point out the power station, the coal plant in Ashkelon is actually providing Gaza with 10% of electricity, and then I get to the northern Gaza-Israel border. This is before we're even looking into Gaza. Now, from this point, you can actually walk on one hillock even closer, and you walk right up to the very border. You're literally just, 100 meters from the border, and at that point, you can see jeeps driving back and forth. You can see into the towns of northern Gaza, Beit Hanun, Beit Lahia, Jabalia refugee camp, into Gaza City. I always point out that Gaza is built on a ridge of 60 meters high, and what we're looking up is that the slight incline to the top of the ridge, 60 meters. But that if you were to slope down on the other side, that we can't have a view of, that's where you get to the ancient port city of Gaza. And this is always a good opportunity and good point to talk about the crazy dynamics where the people of Gaza have 4 hours a day of electricity, but they're blaming Israel. But actually, Netanyahu government is trying to increase the electricity in Gaza, and who is stopping them? It's the PLO in Ramallah, because they have a war with Hamas, and actually, just the whole proxy wars, Islamic Jihad and Hamas and Egypt, and you guys all can do your analysis of the situation, but that it's a very good place. But I always point out that the key reason why Israel would be interested, other than on a humanitarian level, of course, that there will be electricity in Gaza. Why does it matter so much? First of all, if there's no electricity, if there's only 4 or 7 hours, you have the sewage treatment plants in Gaza. And in 2018, when there's the electricity ran out. Yeah, I don't go to the water museum in Nir Am, because I rather to show and give the explanations at the reservoir itself. If you have time, you can go into the water museum, but I don't include it. But if there's no electricity in 2018, what happens when 2 million people in Gaza, right? There are 2 million people. When they flush their toilets, where does that sewage go? It goes straight into the Mediterranean. And I always like to point out, right at this, you can see where the northern Gaza-Israel border is. It goes right into the Mediterranean. There's a seawall there. By the way, if you ever have time, it's really nice to go to the next to Kibbutz, south of Ashkelon, basically the northernmost, southernmost beach on the coast of the Mediterranean. You can look into northern Gaza and see the seawall. So I always point out from that point when we're looking into Gaza, if there's no electricity in Gaza, that sewage, like in 2018, will go upstream. And not only will it pollute the beaches of Ashkelon, and I give the example of, in 2018, I went with my wife and kids, and they closed the beaches because there was sewage from Gaza floating up current. What happened in 2018? That sewage made it all the way up to Ashdod. What's near Ashdod? The National Desalinization Plant. And when the sewage is sitting at the desalinization plant, it's not a sewage desalinization treatment plant. You understand that that desalinization plant is a national strategic asset for the entire state of Israel. We can be generous in our peace treaties with Jordan and the Kinneret water because we have a backup plan, which is our desalinization plant. But if there's sewage floating from Gaza, it would destroy the desalinization plant and close it down, as it did in 2018. So I always like to point out that it's in our direct national interest that there be more hours of electricity in Gaza, also for the humanitarian concerns, the hospitals that need to run. And, as of now, we have 4 to 6 to 8 hours a day of electricity. I think it's up to 8 and rotating hours, but there's a lot you can talk about there. Now, driving back south from the Asaf Siboni lookout point. There's another lookout point, and it's named after, right before you get to Black Arrow, on the right. There's a firing range, and I always like to leave a minute or two and get a little bit of the blood, the heart's pumping, because often they'll hear firing there. So I say, no, that's not Israel and Hamas firing at each other, a breakdown of the ceasefire, but that's a firing range. The army and police, there's a shooting range there. You can actually drive around the shooting range, and right behind the shooting range, there is a memorial to an Israeli Druze officer who in the 1990s was sent by Israel to negotiate, you know, the Oslo Accords, and he was sent into Gaza, and he was killed. It's called Nabi Meri, Mem Resh Yud, Mem Resh Aleph Yud, Nabi Meri. And what's really, really cool and interesting is that lookout point and memorial to the Druze soldier, there's actually a tower that's also right on the border and right looking into the heart of Gaza. And this particular tower, you can drive with any tourists, and the soldiers just will wave you in, unless it's, you know, a super high security incident the day before. I've driven there many times with tourists, and this is the one spot, by the way, where the Israeli and the global media who are looking for the best viewpoint will climb up to that tower right next to the Druze memorial, okay? Nabi Mari. Now, let's go to the Black Arrow. You guys with me? Do I have anyone still? What was closed? Oh, you're talking about, someone mentioned it. Yeah, so Nabi Arrow. Black Arrow, there's a few things I want to point out about the Black Arrow, okay? First of all, it's the main memorial and lookout point where the state of Israel brings politicians, brings journalists, where the army spokespeople will always come. You can always see units of the army there. It's like, and there's a lot to talk about. First of all, the 50s battles, the story of the incursions, in the 1950s, after the 48 war, there were a number of terrorist attacks. There were the cross-border wars, basically, where the Fedayun, you've heard of the Fedayun, attacked Rehovot, and about 500 Israelis were killed in cross-border attacks. So the Black Memorial is a memorial to the unit that Ariel Sharon created in the 1950s, and they did a cross-border raid back into Gaza and destroyed an Egyptian army base. So basically, there are these pillars. Each pillar at the Black Arrow Memorial is commemorating one of the different cross-border battles with the amount of casualties both on the Israeli side and the enemy side. But the biggest memorial is the Black Arrow itself, which was an operation in the 1950s, basically led by Ariel Sharon, going into an Egyptian army base. Now, that's a chance to talk about the 50s cross-border wars, and a lot of these little memorials at the Black Arrow, they actually have these little standards where you push the button and there's explanations in Hebrew and in English, depending on how much time you have. You can explore that. But what I like to do is also go past the official Black Arrow Memorial area, okay, and go onto the stones looking above it, because right across the border, you can actually look into a place where is the headquarters of the weekly border protest called the Great March of Return. And there's an open field, and if you look across, if you come with binoculars, you can actually see some tents and a space right across the border where there's an Israeli flag, Palestinian flag flying. And this is actually the headquarters of the weekly border protest called the Great March of Return. And then I always use that to talk about the Israeli narratives and what the world says, that we're committing human rights abuses, and we're actually perhaps doing a restrained response. What country in the world would, allow 10 or 20 or 50,000 demonstrators to come right up to its border? Nice. Yes, there's a memorial in the Druze hometown of Horfesh, Nachon. So this is actually a memorial there also. So as I was saying, And so you can look across the border, and if you don't know it, but that's actually the headquarters. And many times during the last few years, that is where the protests would start every single Friday. And it's very interesting. And there's a lot, and you can look up Great March of Return and the whole debate and human rights debate. There's a lot to talk about there. But I want to talk also about another incident that happened at the Black Arrow that I love to show groups, and they find fascinating. Basically, there's an outer road, a ring road, a dirt road, edging the fields around the Black Arrow. You basically, from the top point of the Black Arrow, you're walking to the right, and you're walking around the dirt road, and you stop at a certain point, and you look up and you see some eucalyptus trees that are black, and you look at the base of the eucalyptus trees, and this is a year and a half later now, they're still there, piles of shattered glass. Basically, this in November 2018. You guys remember the incident where Israel sent in an undercover unit into Gaza? They were discovered because their accent was a bit off, and the Druze commander was killed in a gun battle. 5, 6, or 7 Hamas fighters were killed. Basically, that sparked a round of about 450 rockets that were fired at Israel. In that 2 or 3 mini battle time, Hamas militants fired an anti-tank missile that blew up a bus, and the bus exploded at that exact spot. So you can actually see, and I tell this dramatic story of how they blew up the bus, and you look up and the burnt tree is still there, and on the ground there's still shattered pieces of the bus, including the window from the glass, that anyone can just walk right up there, and you can pick up shattered window glass, put it in your hand, and drop it onto the ground. And it's very dramatic, and it's very much demonstrates. And by the way, and then you point right behind there on the road is also an earthen berm, a mound of dirt that the Israeli army put up after the bus was blown up. Of course, followed a year later by last May, which is now a year ago, where the berm of earth, where another civilian was killed in an anti-tank missile. Okay, so I'm gonna leave the Black Arrow, and I'm now moving and driving south towards kibbutz Kfar Aza, and anyone here heard of Ma'oz Mul Aza? Ma'oz Mul Aza? The Ma'oz, next to the gas station, next to the entrance of kibbutz Kfar Aza, is a very fascinating memorial site. It's a remnant of the original kibbutz Saad, S-A-A-D, founded in 1943 approximately. The site of the kibbutz was abandoned in the course of the 47-40 war, independence war, and the kibbutz was moved to a new location. But the original site, there still is a lookout tower and full of bullet holes, and they're totally now, by the way, renovating the museum. Also, if you contact David Drury from Kibbutz Saad, he can let you in. You have to coordinate a visit to Ma'oz Mul Aza. But what I find interesting, he also has on display there a kite. You remember the story of the flaming kites and balloons coming in from Gaza? He has a kite on display, and there's a whole museum display about kibbutz Assad and the story of the 47 war. If you guys are interested, it's called Ma'oz Mul Aza. Ma'oz Mul Aza. Basically, right at the entrance, you can't miss it. Right at the entrance. Now, I recommend, by the way, and especially for firm groups, that you take lunch in kibbutz Saad, and it's very easy to coordinate to have lunch in the Chad HaRochel in kibbutz Saad. And they have a beautiful Beit Knesset and a Beit Midrash, where I often do a seminar about the issue of Gaza-Israel border, and often I will do a Skype call to people, journalists or professors or peace activists in Gaza who are willing and interesting to talk to Israelis. So if anybody wants to also include a discussion with actual Gazans with a group that you're bringing to the region, write to me. And I do it every week on my tours. There's a professor at a university, there's a journalist. I have basically 3 or 4 or 5 contacts that I rotate through. And these are people who are willing and interested to talk to Israelis. So I can arrange a Skype call with actual people in Gaza for Q&A with an actual human being on the other side of the divide, of the enemy divide. Can they get in trouble? Well, there is a group called the Gaza Youth Committee that do get in trouble and actually are being arrested by Hamas. But the journalist, he's with Al Jazeera, and the professor, they both have their covers of journalism and academia. So they haven't gotten in trouble. But there is another group that have gotten in trouble, but not from my discussions, but no, I'm talking Gazan journalists, actual Arab, Muslim, Arab Palestinians, not foreigners. I'm talking about that. But that I would say, if anyone was interested, I can make that connection for you separately. It's complicated. I want to move on. So Kibbutz Saad is a great place to have lunch. It's a Hadar Rochel. You have to pay, I think, 40 or 50 shekels a person, but you coordinate ahead of time. Again, there's a guy named David Drori, from Kibbutz Saad that coordinates tour groups. And if anybody's interested, I can send you his contact, and it's very easy. Now, driving past Kibbutz Saad, now I'm going to turn right to Kibbutz Nahal Oz. Okay? You all know where's Kibbutz Nahal Oz? You're familiar with Nahal Oz? Yes? So Kibbutz Nahal Oz, as you're driving to Kibbutz Nahal Oz, there's also an interesting story, how it was founded in the 50s, and you talk about the Nahal Brigade, and you talk about former soldiers who formed kibbutzim, but I actually don't go into kibbutz. Yes, I'll post my email. Should I post the email and my phone number on the WhatsApp group or on the chat of the Zoom? On the WhatsApp group. Anyway, so first of all, in Kibbutz Nahal Oz, there is a woman who meets with groups. And I have her contact information if anybody's interested, because you always want to meet with people who live on the border communities and arrange meetings. I'm going to talk about that now, because driving past Kibbutz Isra Guides, actually I'm not on the email group, I'm just on the WhatsApp group of Isra Guides. But if you could please add me. This is my email address. Let's start with that. Add me, please, to the WhatsApp email. Isra Guide, sorry, email. Okay. All right. Yeah, so I'm sorry, I have a lot of pictures and maps, but I think the descriptions of what I'm telling you, and how about this, I'll email. I'll just prepare an email for all of you with maps and links to what I'm talking about, okay? I have it all already, and I'm just apologize. I'm technically challenged, but I can assure you I can help any one of you create an incredible day on the Gaza-Israel border. Now, driving past Kibbutz Nahal Oz, first of all, there's a huge army base with about 50 tanks that you can drive right up to it. You can pull into the army base. You can even get out or walk up to the tanks. They're very friendly, the soldiers at that army base. It's right at the entrance of Kibbutz Nahal Oz. So that's really exciting for groups to be able to just get out of your car. They've never shooed me away once ever. And I've seen other groups, I just don't have time, but actually get out of the car, walk up to the tanks, say hi to the soldiers. What tourist wouldn't like to walk up to an army base with, 10 or 20 tanks and huge army bulldozers dealing with moving earth along the border? So that's right there, the entrance of Kibbutz Nahal Oz. Now, driving up past Kibbutz Nahal Oz, you might think you can't drive any further straight, but you can. There is a cement factory, 24 hours a day, 6 days a week, other than Shabbat, day and night, for the last 3 years. These cement trucks, and they're still going. You can drive right up to them. Are loading up and pouring hundreds of millions of dollars of cement straight into the ground. What are they doing? They're building an underground wall to stop the tunnels. And you can actually drive right up to this cement factory and see the cement truck. It's really fascinating to talk about the underground barrier. More than above ground, there are a few places along the border where there's an actual wall. At Kibbutz Kerem Shalom way in the south, by the way, I forgot to mention that you should also tell the groups that there's only 2 open border crossings. One is for 500 trucks going into Gaza a day and 500 trucks coming out. That is at Kerem Shalom for goods and supplies in the south on the Egyptian border. Erez crossing, where we started the tour, is where people go in and out, back and forth. So there's the people crossing and the goods crossing in the south. So the cement trucks, 3 years non-stop, dumping hundreds of millions. I also talk about the absurdity. Why are we pouring cement straight into the ground? Sometimes as deep as 70 meters deep. And from what I'm told, the technology is that there is a series of pillars with cement and like a section of wall, but there's sensors. It's not a solid wall underground, but it's like wall and pillars up to 70 meters deep with sensors, but basically along the entire 55 kilometers border from the Egyptian border all the way out around to Netiv HaSara in the Mediterranean, they're building this underground wall and barrier. And so it's a great place to talk about and to visit. Now driving, you can drive past a cement block factory, and this is an amazing viewpoint. In fact, I think most vivid on the whole tour. You might think you can't drive further, but you can. You can drive almost up to the border, and in times of tension, there's 2 roads to the left. Basically, okay, you're just circling Kibbutz Nachalos. In times when it's a bit more ragua, you can actually drive right up to this mound of earth where the tanks usually go up and look right into Gaza. Next to this mound, you can stop, you can give an explanation, and in front of you, looking across, you literally 200 meters from 150 meters from the border, you look into an Arab neighborhood of Gaza called Shijaiya. Can everyone say Shijaiya? Shijaiya. In Shijaiya, a lot of things have happened. One, you guys remember when Israel assassinated the leader of Islamic Jihad a few months ago? And that led to a round of rockets, not from Hamas, ironically, but from Islamic Jihad. Okay? Israel assassinated the leader of Islamic Jihad. There was a great battle in 1948, in the 2014 Gaza war. The largest battle of the 2014 war happened right in this neighborhood. It was called the Battle of Shijaiya. Okay, the largest battle. And you can actually see right in front of you ruins and rubble from a whole neighborhood that was destroyed. Basically, some Israeli anti-personnel tank, like a anti-personnel carrier, went in to try to stop a source of rocket fire. The military vehicle got stuck. 2 soldiers got out to try to fix it. They survived. That vehicle was ambushed right at that spot where you're looking right across. One of the 2 soldiers, whose body is still being held by Hamas, was dragged out of the vehicle right at that spot where you're looking at, right across the border. Sergeant Aron Shaul. This all happened right there, okay? And it's a fascinating place. So there's a lot to talk about the Battle of Shijaiya. And next to this neighborhood is the most crowded neighborhood in Gaza, outside of the Jabalia refugee camp. It's the first neighborhood that was built during the Mamluk era, outside of the ancient city walls of Gaza City. There's a lot to talk about Shijaiya neighborhood. You're looking at Shijaiya. First of all, this is a place where fuel used to go in. It's called the Nahal Oz fuel point. Next to this neighborhood, looking right at it, you just shift your view slightly, To the left is also the biggest point where the weekly demonstrators come for the Great March of Return. This is also the point where they often are launching kites, flaming kites and balloons, and the fields right around you. In 2018 summer, were on fire, many of the fields. There's a lot to talk about here. This is where often a lot of media and journalists will focus when they're focusing and trying to highlight and talk about Israel-Gaza conflict. Now, what's fascinating is when you're there looking in Shajaya, you look to the left, there's also an industrial zone. Anyone here heard of the Kearney terminal? Anyone here know what is the Kearney terminal? Basically, when Oslo was signed, the Oslo Accords, Israel asked the world to invest in this industrial zone to employ Arabs, Palestinians, and they did. And there was a hopeful time. They created an industrial zone that employed, I think, 40,000 Arabs, Palestinians, Gazans. Basically, at that place, there was a coffee shop and a building for people from businessmen from Israel and Gaza to make deals together. The idea is that the Israelis from Ashdod would bring an unrestricted flow of Chomer Gelem, raw materials. The raw materials would be, at this point, sent into Gaza, and out would come finished products like Levi's jeans for exports and many, many products. You have the labor there. You have the raw materials from Israel coming from the Ashdod port. Remember, the only port alternative is Cairo. That's not possible. Northern Sinai is not possible, so it's coming from Israel. And at the height of Oslo, up until 2005, even after the second Intifada, up to 40,000 Palestinians were employed in this industrial zone. What happened in 2000 and I think it's 7? You guys know what happened? Why did this whole place close? And first of all, I want to back up. You also look at it and you see that there's 2 large towers there. Those are remnants of the British era airport. This is the beginning of the cement road. You guys all probably can tell me better, but basically all of the infrastructure there was built by the British. They were afraid that the Nazis and the Axis powers would join up and try to join up with the Italians in Italy and come through Egypt. And so there's a lot to talk about. I'm also, that's the first point of what's called the cement road. There's an old cement road from the British era, but basically a whole network also of bunkers in the hills around there where the British were hiding weapons in the lead up to World War II, and fears that this would become, another front of a battle with the Axis Nazis and the Axis powers. So there's British era airport towers that are still there in this Kearney, now closed Kearney Crossing. Now what happened at Kearney in 2007, I think it is? Basically, out comes a shipping crate from this particular industrial zone. All these goods that Gazans made to be shipped from Ashdod port, the shipping crate gets to Ashdod, in Ashdod port. What pops out of the shipping crate? 3 Hamas militants. There was a false wall on the shipping crate. 7 port workers are killed in Ashdod. That ended the dream. So I often say this industrial zone they called this was going to be the Singapore of the Holy Land. Singapore meaning shared industrial zone, shared business, and for almost 10 years there were Arab and Jewish businessmen making deals, drinking coffee. There were ATM machines that both could instantly pull out cash. There was like a whole, alternative possible reality. Now driving, now I'm going to leave from and all of this you can see, even in times of tension, even if it's very tense, even within Kibbutz Nahal Oz, you can drive up to the outer fence, either on the outside or on the inside. If you don't feel comfortable on the outside, there's actually a lookout tower on the inside of the fence that I've taken groups up. You can climb up that lookout tower and also look right into the Jaya and the Kearney crossing and tell this whole story. So it's great. It's a great viewpoint and lookout point. And I highly recommend that you go there. And I don't know why no one else does, but it's you feel like you see trucks, you see people on camels and donkeys, you hear mosques in the distance with the muezzin. You really get a feeling of the pulse of Gaza, life in Gaza. When you're at this particular point, you're seeing all of this. You see, there's also a dump, an industrial dump where all the was collected after the neighborhood was destroyed in the 2014 Gaza War, the Battle of Shujaya. So there's lots to see there. Basically now, I'm leaving that point, I'm driving back around Kibbutz Nachal Oz, and now I'm taking us to the Berot Yitzhak Memorial. Okay, Kibbutz Berot Yitzhak was a kibbutz that was built in the 40s, and there's basically a much more detailed Kibbutz Berot Yitzhak Memorial and sound and light show in Kibbutz Alomim. There's a guest center in Kibbutz Alomim and a lot, but I skip the sound and light show in Kibbutz Alomim because I feel I don't need the Hollywood music and the loudspeakers. I feel it's actually much more powerful to be out in the incredible, beautiful open fields of Sdot Negev, and you drive right up. And by the way, as we're driving up to the ruins of Kibbutz Berot Yitzhak, I also point out there's a big earth pile next to the cowshed. So I said they even put up earth piles not to protect the humans, but the cows. They have this big earth, huge pile of earth to protect the refit from rocket fire from Gaza. So you can point that. So you drive up to, and also you can put ways for Berot Yitzhak Memorial. But there's a great panels, color panels outside that you can tell the story of the kibbutz, Berot Yitzhak. You can tell the story of the wells of Isaac. There's a few pasukim that they quote in the memorial there from the Tanakh. You can talk about the ancient kingdom of Gerar and how Isaac fled Hebron and went to the kingdom of Gerar and dug wells. And then you can talk about there's a beautiful map of the Peel Commission map and the partition plan map, and then all of the Yeshuvim from Negev and that whole aqueduct. There's map of all the aqueduct system of the south, and a whole timeline of when all of the Yeshuvim between 37 and then Achadesrei Nikudot, one night, the whole stock and barricade, the whole stock and barricade thing you can talk about, because that was how Kibbutz Berot Yitzhak was built. And there's a lot to talk about with Kibbutz Berot Yitzhak. Now, I'm not going to say you guys might find it interesting if you really want to, especially if you have Aussies and Kiwis in your group, but it's a bit of a drive to get there. There's and it's another lookout point. So basically, you're looking at the Anzac Memorial into Gaza at the trash dump near Der Bala, and I find it useless and worthwhile to go there. But just to point out, but if anybody's interested, there's also a memorial to the Australian and Kiwi soldiers who joined the British, and the whole strategy and the whole story of outing. Cutting off the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman soldiers in Beersheba in World War I. So that's called the Anzac Memorial, and you can Waze it and Google it and find it if you guys really want to go there. Now, Berot Yitzhak, you can basically drive through the fields. It's very beautiful. Back with Saad, and you have two alternative ways. I'm going to take us now to the road. You came up from Kibbutz Erez, Black Arrow, Mefalsim to Sderot, or you can drive another route, which is past Netivot. And if you have a religious group, you have the tomb of the Baba Sali. I myself lived for several years in Netivot. There's a lot to talk about in Netivot, but basically I use this chance to talk about the development town. To the 40s, and then development towns of Sderot, Netivot, and Ofakim, basically connecting Ashkelon and Beersheba, and the story of development towns and how Netivot is, I would say, more successful integration and less called development town now, and Ofakim. But you guys, it's a good place if you guys want to go to the tomb of the Baba Sali. on your way to Sderot, if you have a religious group, it's also a beautiful place to talk about North African Jewry and how the towns, the kibbutzim are all Ashkenazi, and the towns, the development towns, are largely Sephardi. So you can talk about the whole Likud versus Labor, and the liberal and more conservative in the towns, Likud strongholds versus the more labor merits in the kibbutzim, and how even with all of these different wars and not all communities still hold fast to their allegiances politically, no matter what's going on. Now I'm going to take us now into the town of Sderot, and with that, I think I've gone a little over an hour, and I apologize for all the technical challenges and all the information I'm not getting to. But in the town of Sderot, I want to talk about briefly about four things worth visiting. First of all, you pull into Sderot, you see all of these ikarot with statues of musicians, artists, and musicians. Basically, a lot of musicians come from town Sderot, and there's a lot of you can talk about the arts, the arts, and a lot of the musicians that come from Sderot and famous bands all around Israel. The first thing that's worth visiting is the police station. You guys know about the police station in Sderot. They have a rocket collection. So you stop in front of the rocket collection, and you stop in front of the rocket collection. Now, I will include in the email, and I can even attach it to the WhatsApp list, a really good chart about the type of rockets they have in Gaza and the range of rockets and how they're built. And we talk in Sderot about the rocket reality of living under 13,000 rockets, how you have 15 seconds when you hear a siren, a Tseva Adom, you to call it Shachar Adom, but there's a Shachar family that were getting hassled and found it offensive, so they changed the whole system to Tseva Adom, from red alert, Shachar Adom, to Tseva Adom, color red, based on a particular family that lives in Sderot. They wanted to respect them and not traumatize them more with their name sounding too similar to alert sounds like. So you go to the police station, you have this whole collection of rockets. You have both Qassam rockets and longer range rockets, but there's a whole talk that I'm not going to give, but I do give about the types of rockets, how they get the materials. And one of the sad ironies that Israel was so good, we get blamed around the world for not allowing in dual-use materials into Gaza, right? And we're trying to prevent materials that the Hamas and Jihad can use and turn into rockets. And we actually largely successfully held off, militants from getting rocket material. Then suddenly, about 2 years ago, someone in Gaza, a former worker in one of the kibbutzim in Gush Katif, pointed out, hey, under Gush Katif, Israel, we left all the agricultural, all of the fields, the Pardesim, we left everything in Gaza still there, underneath all of the Gush Katif, basically hundreds of miles of pipes that we didn't bother to uproot because we were trying to allow the workers to take over the vegetable and flower greenhouses. Now they have a 20-year supply for new missile-making material right under former Gush Katif. So anyway, you go to the police station, you take a left towards the Hesder Yeshiva of Sderot, okay? Now I want to point out the Hesder Yeshiva, it's the best view in all the city of Sderot. The people of the Hesder Yeshiva are very friendly, even if you have women in your group. Important, of course, you want to get them to dress modestly, but you go up on an outer staircase at the Hesder Yeshiva, and there's the best viewpoint of the entire city of Sderot. Up on top, there's an incredible pesel, 2 pestles, statues. One is called the Tree of Life. They're both made out of rockets, by the way. And the other is a Chanukiah, and it's really beautiful and stunning beautiful that they've turned in these a map with this to get to Siboni, Asaf Siboni. Is that okay, guys? If I send it in an email or in WhatsApp list, how can I get you that material? a lot of these maps and materials. Okay, so the viewpoints, and also there's a guy named Ari Katz. He's a spokesman of the yeshiva. He's an Anglo, and anybody's interested, I can give you his contact. He's often available. If not him, there's a guy named Ephraim. He's a bookkeeper for the yeshiva. He's also a children of Anglos, and he speaks well enough English to speak to any group about what is life in Sderot like, and dealing with the rockets. Now, leaving the Hesder Yeshiva, there's a few highlights on there's a playground, and I'll send you the link to get to the playground. Basically, this playground, a lot of the JNF groups and the Jewish Federation and Birthright groups, when they come to Sderot, they're often, the first thing they go to is this playground. And what's unique about the playground is that the playground itself is a rocket shelter. It's, I always thought it was a snake or a slug, but the kids at Sderot corrected me. It's actually two massive cement zachalim, caterpillars. And the playground, the point is the playground itself is a rocket shelter, is a bomb shelter. It's called a protected park. And it's just a 5-minute drive from the Hesder Yeshiva, and not difficult. It's right next to Beit Chabad. There's also a Beit Chabad, and in the parking lot of the shlucha of the Hesder Yeshiva next to the Beit Chabad, there's also, they've left part of one building, a second floor like dorm building, damage of a rocket. So if you want to show a group what the actual damage, oh, there it is. That's a nice picture. Yes, that is the rooftop of the Hesder Yeshiva. That is the rocket Hanukkah, and it's the best viewpoint. Now, on the rooftop there, I like to, yeah, all is rocket proof except the roof. So even above, by the way, where this picture of the rocket memorial Hanukkah, there's even a higher mirpeset and steps that go up where you have a 360 view, and there you can see into Gaza. There you can see the tree. Remember I told you earlier that the tree and the memorial to the Jewish Mukhtar cowboy from Kibbutz Niram. You can see also to the hills of Hebron on a clear day. So you see, look, it's not so far. It's such a small country from Judea and Samaria. You look on one side to the hills of Hebron, the other side you can see the rooftops of Beit Hania and Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun, sorry. Beit Lahia and Beit Hanun, the northern neighborhoods of Gaza. You can see all of that from the rooftop of the Hesder Yeshiva. I also like to point out, you see cranes. Israelis have not fled after the 2008 Gaza battle. Israelis emptied half the population, fled Sderot, but then they developed the new mentality, which is our Zionism is not just going to live the new frontier of Zionism, hilltops of Judea and Samaria or something, but this many people have chosen, especially the students. And this Hesder Yeshiva, by the way, is the largest Hesder Yeshiva in the state of Israel, 500 students. And they're very, very friendly, the students, and very welcoming, and it's a great spot to talk about how Sderot is a thriving city. I'm just going to talk about a last thing in Sderot before maybe open up for questions. It's very easy to get to, oh, there's the tree, okay. It's very easy from there. If you just type in the Toto Stadium of Sderot, Stadion Toto. You go to the Toto Stadium, you turn left from there, basically to the one open neighborhood that they're still building. And you go to the edge of the field and you can actually drive right up to, and within reason, within 100 to 250 meters, Iron Dome missile launcher. Everyone in the world has heard about Iron Dome, but to actually see it with your own eyes and to look up close at an Iron Dome missile launcher is also a great, interesting and fascinating experience. And there's a lot you could talk about Iron Dome, and then of course the different missile technology of they're going to build the Iron Dome. They've come up with light blade and all these different technologies now the ironic thing is that, 90% interception rate successful of Iron Dome, but for the longest time we couldn't figure out how to stop balloons. You know that 6 months ago a group of balloons landed in my daughter's school next to Nitivot with a package on it that was meant to be booby trapped to kill children, and we couldn't figure out how to stop 50 helium balloons, but we can stop rockets. So they developed all this new technology. First of all, it's to track now the balloons and the kites. We have that technology, but still the absurdity that we have, $1 million to $2 million going to build in this interception system to stop kites and balloons, which is operation, it's called Light Blade. It's the same people who built Iron Dome, and you could also connect now to the COVID-19. It's the same companies that are building the Iron Dome and all of these different technologies to stop things in the air from coming towards the Gaza border region. So they're now converting the same factories to build those, to build the ventilators, and new, cheap, quick, efficient production line to build ventilators for use in Israel and to ship around the world. So we're converting. Now, obviously, we're going to connect. The next time you do give a tour, you can connect this present-day crisis with the conversion of the missile production lines to ventilators and technologies to fight the corona. Okay, guys, I covered a lot of ground. Did you guys learn anything new? Find anything anything interesting? Anything you'd like to include in a future tour? I'm happy to consult and help design anytime you want to visit the whole region. I can direct you. A little girl named Shachar wrote to the Prime Minister. Okay, I heard the story a little differently. Okay. Both statues were made by your son-in-law. Oh, wow, that's cool. Elon Maser. Okay, that's really interesting.
Wait a second.
Yeah.
Eliyahu, some of the things that you're reading were sent directly to you. Can you share that with people?
So someone asked me, someone pointed out, Joe pointed out, they were made, these two statues on the Hezbollah Yeshiva roof were made by his son-in-law, Elon Maser. I didn't know that. Wow, that's very cool. Someone said, what are there hundreds of miles of under Gush Katif pipes, silurot, pipes that can be used to make rockets? There are hundreds of miles that they didn't even know and didn't dig and didn't look until a few months ago. They realized they discovered a whole new source of rocket making material. Somebody already wrote, Robin wrote to everybody exactly what I just said, that the rockets. Yes, I would love to, by the way, when this mess is over, to do a Isra guide tour for all of you. Just cover, transportation and lunch and whatever on me, it's a tour I love doing, and I'm like the rest of you, locked in the house, and I miss guiding this tour, but it's fascinating, it's interesting. But for me, the critical part is to start at the Erez crossing, to actually meet people from Gaza, and to present also Israel's case, because Israel's case doesn't get presented, and try to introduce voices of moderates, and not all the Arabs and Palestinians are trying to murder us and kill us. There are some good people in Gaza, and to feature that part as well. Okay, any questions, or should we sign off now? Judy, what do you say?
Okay, anybody have anything they want to add or
I'm
ask?
just going to make a question.
Yeah.
If you could send to the rest of us, make a list of all the contacts that you mentioned in passing, the woman in the Tiva Sarai and so on and so forth. And also, if you could prepare your own map to pinpoint some of these places. I tried to follow you on a couple of different maps, and it was a little hard to know, like, where did you turn off for one of the first lookouts that you did before you got to Black Arrow.
Yes.
All these things would be really helpful to pinpoint. Really understand that you had some problems there, but it would just be helpful for us to know how to turn to these people.
Yes. Okay, very good.
Thank you so much.
Okay, all right. Yashar Koach, thanks for listening and thanks for your questions and thanks for your patience. I really appreciate that.